In Yu-Gi-Oh, there is an unofficial archetype referred to as Chaos, which encompasses any cards that have to do with both light and dark attribute monsters. Whereas most of them require both of these attributes in order to summon them in some way, or monsters who just have Chaos in their name. So in this list, we'll go over the 10 best Chaos monsters under those criteria. And at number 10, we have Blackluster Soldier Sacred Soldier. The Blackluster Soldier archetype is unofficially a Chaos archetype, as nearly all of the Blackluster support cards, except the original Blackluster Soldier, has to do with light and dark monsters. Unfortunately, this card cannot special summon itself from your hand by banishing a light and dark monster, like normal Chaos monsters, but when it is summoned, you can target one of your banished light or dark monsters and return it to your graveyard in order to banish one of your opponent's cards. So you can use this card to both return resources to the graveyard and get rid of an opponent's card, which is why this card saw some niche play in Duel Links. People would use A and D Changer and then return it to the graveyard with Sacred Soldier in order to banish an opponent's card. And it has another effect where if it destroys a monster by battle, you can add a level 7 or lower warrior type monster from your graveyard to your hand, which basically means it can recover any warrior types except for other copies of itself since it's level 8. Not half bad. Definitely the weakest Chaos monster on this list though. And at number 9, we have Sky Scourge Norleras. This is a Chaos monster that requires you to banish specific types of light and dark monsters in order to summon itself. So in order to special summon this card from your hand, you need to banish 1 light fairy type monster and 3 dark fiend type monsters from your graveyard, which is a pretty steep cost for its summon, as those 2 types of monsters don't combo well with each other. But its effect is absolutely worth its summon, because what you can do is pay 1,000 life points to send all cards on the field and in both players' hands to the graveyard, and then you get to draw 1 card. So a full board and hand wipe, which is absolutely worth that tough summoning requirement. Now, here's the thing with Sky Scourge. Normally, when people use this card, they don't actually summon it, and instead just steal its effect from the graveyard with Phantom of Chaos. Now, despite Phantom of Chaos having Chaos in its name, it's not normally referred to as a Chaos monster, because it has almost nothing to do with light and dark types. But since it has Chaos in its name, I would totally say it counts as a Chaos monster. So really, Phantom of Chaos should share this place on this list with Sky Scourge Norleras, because these 2 cards are usually always played together, because Phantom of Chaos can banish Sky Scourge from your graveyard in order to copy its effect. And then you can just pay 1,000 life points to wipe the board in both players' hands and then draw a card, all without having to set up your graveyard with a whole bunch of specific types of monsters. And instead, you can just set up your graveyard with 1 Sky Scourge. Because of this, there are a few gimmicky OTKs which require these 2 cards working in tandem. Anything that can wipe a person's hand and field at the same time is worth noting. But honestly, it's not super competitive, which is why this is only at the number 9 spot. And at number 8, we have Lightpulsar Dragon. This is one of the few Chaos monsters who has 2 different summoning requirements depending on where you summon this card from. If you summon it from your hand, it has a standard banish 1 light and dark monster from your graveyard. But if you want to special summon this card from the graveyard, you can send 1 light and dark monster from your hand to the graveyard to bring it out. I should mention that its graveyard summoning method is rarely used, because having to discard 2 cards to summon 1 monster from the graveyard is usually not the best thing in the world to do. That being said, it's a 2500 attack beatstick who has a good floating effect, so when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can special summon a level 5 or higher dark dragon type monster from your graveyard. Unfortunately, because of the way this effect is worded, having a when instead of an if, that means its floating effect can miss timing in a lot of situations. So if you tribute this card or send it to the graveyard as a resource, there's a good chance it'll miss its timing and not be able to summon anything. That being said, if this card is sent to the graveyard in its intended way, by being destroyed by an opponent's monster or card effect, you will be able to activate its effect while almost not missing the timing, depending on what your opponent does to destroy this card. And what's really good about its floating effect is it has a really good target, being Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon. a level 5 or higher Dark Dragon type monster who is so good that it's currently banned in the OCG. And when Lightpulsar Dragon used to see play, you can absolutely bet it saw play alongside Red Eye's Darkness Metal Dragon, who could just then revive Lightpulsar Dragon with its effect. And at number 7, we have Chaos Betrayer. This is a level 6 monster which can special summon itself from the graveyard by banishing a light and dark monster from the graveyard as well. But if special summoned this way, it's banished when it leaves the field. And also if this card is special summoned, you get to remove a card from your opponent's graveyard from play. I think this is the only Chaos monster who can special summon itself from the graveyard by using materials from the graveyard as well. And monsters who can special summon themselves from the graveyard are just infinitely more valuable than cards that can special summon themselves from the hand. And the fact that it has an effect on top of its good summoning effect, that just makes it a little bit better in my book. And at number 6, we have Chaos Dragon Levianeer. This is a 3k beat stick that can be special summoned from the hand by banishing a combination of light and dark monsters from your graveyard. And when it's summoned this way, you get to activate one of its 3 effects, depending on the attributes of the monsters banished for this card summoning. So if you only banished light monsters, you get to special summon a monster from your graveyard in defense position. If only dark monsters, you get to shuffle a random card in your opponent's hand back into their deck. And if you used a combination of both light and dark, you can destroy up to 2 cards in the field. Now, all 3 of these effects are good. Generally, cards that let you special summon from the graveyard are really good. Cards which allow you to disrupt your opponent's hand are good, and being able to destroy more than 1 card on the field is good. Especially since the hand disruption effect doesn't discard, it sends it back to the deck, which is much better as most decks don't care about their cards being discarded. In fact, it helps some of them out. And its effect to destroy 2 cards in the field doesn't target, so they can't chain the cards you're about to destroy to this effect, and have to activate them preemptively. And the only downsides to its best effect, the one to special summon from the graveyard, is that it can't work on link monsters, since they specifically have to go in defense position, and link monsters cannot go into defense position. Honestly, there isn't really much bad about this card, other than the fact that it requires 3 monsters in the graveyard as setup, which is kind of a hefty cost. It's just some of the other ones that appear higher on this list are either a little better or just more iconic. And at number 5, we have Black Dragon Collapserpent and White Dragon wyverburster. This will be a dual spot since these 2 cards are almost always played together, and you'll see why in a second. Black Dragon has an effect where you can special summon it from your hand by banishing a light monster from your graveyard. And if this card is sent to the graveyard from the field, you can add a White Dragon wyverburster from your deck to your hand. White Dragon wyverburster has an effect basically the same as Black Dragon, except it banishes a dark monster to special summon itself, and can search out Black Dragon when it's sent from the field to the graveyard. And unlike Lightpulsar Dragon, these 2 cards have an if instead of a when for its floating effect, which means it doesn't miss timing. So these cards can be used as tribute fodder or as materials for extra deck plays and still gain their floating effects of being able to search the other copy out, which makes these 2 cards really good and very versatile, to the point where they basically see play in meta decks here and there that happen to use light or dark monsters because they fit in so well with basically anything a deck wants to do, as they're easy to bring out, have good stats on the field, and float when used as materials. And at number 4, we have Black Luster Soldier, the Chaos Warrior. Now this card doesn't really have anything to do with light or dark monsters, but it does have chaos in its name, and it is a Black Luster Soldier card, 2 things which qualify it as a chaos monster. Now Chaos Warrior is a generic Link 3 monster, as it just requires 3 monsters with different names, and if one of the monsters is level 7 or higher, this card cannot be targeted by card effects or destroyed by your opponent's card effects, which is some pretty good protection on a 3k beat stick. Then, in addition to some decent arrow placements, it also has a battle effect, where if it destroys a monster by battle, you can activate one of 3 effects. This card will either gain 1500 attack, gain a second attack on your next turn, or banish 1 card on the field. And since this effect isn't once per turn, if you gain the double attack option and destroy 2 monsters, you'll be able to activate 2 of these effects. Now, all 3 of these effects are okay, If you could attack twice during the same turn, that would undoubtedly be the best of the 3 effects. But since it makes you wait until your next turn, that really balances out the second attack option a little too well, making the other 2 options much more viable to pick, as it's not a good idea to count on one of your monsters existing for more than 1 turn. So if this card chooses to gain 1500 attack, it becomes a 4500 attack beatstick that can't be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects, which is actually not half bad, considering the attack boost is permanent. And of course, banishing 1 card on the field is always good, which is probably what gets used the most out of its 3 effects, where you would probably only use the other 2 effects if your opponent didn't have a card that you wanted to banish. Basically, this card's a high spot for being a pretty good link monster with a decent effect, which honestly makes it so much better than anything a main deck monster really could be, especially since its materials are somewhat generic. It just requires 3 different named monsters. And at number 3, we have Chaos Sorcerer, a card that came out with the first set of Chaos monsters and was considered so good it was banned for a few years. Now, Chaos Sorcerer has an effect where you can special summon it from your hand by banishing a light and dark monster from your graveyard, which is a typical Chaos summoning effect. And then it has an effect on the field where you can banish 1 face-up monster on the field. And this effect is only once per turn, and this card cannot attack the turn you use this effect. So what this card was meant to be was an option of either banishing one of your opponent's monsters or attacking with it. But once extra deck summoning became a thing, this banish effect became much more powerful because of its easy summoning condition, where decks are bringing this card out to be used as synchro or exceeds materials, so they didn't care if this card could attack that turn. So they would just banish a card with its effect and then immediately go into whatever extra deck monster they were using this card as a material for. And since it was a dark level 6 spellcaster type monster, it could be used for a lot of different summons. And those were all pretty good stats to have on a pretty easy to special summon monster. So even after its initial effect was no longer overpowered, it wasn't immediately put on limited because of how useful it was as a combo extender. So it stayed around the limited and semi-limited list for a few years, before finally becoming unlimited once the power creep of the game got to the point where its banish effect wasn't a big deal anymore. So it really only has a high spot on this list for its historical purposes, and not because it's better than the other cards on this list in the current day. But it's still pretty good nonetheless. And at number 2, we have Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. This is another one of the original Chaos monsters, and is why Blackluster Soldiers are basically considered Chaos monsters today. Its effect is the same as Chaos Sorcerers, you just need to banish a light and dark monster from your graveyard to special summon it from your hand. And it has 2 effects on the field, where one of them is the same as Chaos Sorcerer, where you can banish a card, but then this card cannot attack this turn. And its other effect is if this card destroys a monster by battle, you can make a second attack immediately, all in a 3000 attack beatstick. This was really good in the time it came out, and in fact, this card is still good today. So there's a reason this card got banned in one of the very first banned lists, and then stayed banned much longer than Chaos Sorcerer, even if it is unlimited today. It also stayed on the limited list for a really long time once they started loosening the restrictions on this card. And that's because it's easy to summon, has a big body for how easy it is to summon, can spot removal with its banish effect if need be, and if not, it can basically win you the game with its double attack. And there was a very popular combo with a synchro monster called Armory Arm, where if your opponent had 2 monsters on the field in attack position, you could win the game with Blackluster Soldier equipped with Armory Arm, because Armory Arm has the effect to equip itself to a monster, and then that monster will gain 1000 attack. And if the monster it's equipped to destroys a monster by battle, your opponent takes damage equal to the destroyed monster's attack. So since Blackluster Soldier has 3000 attack, Armory Arm would boost it up to 4000. And since Blackluster Soldier can attack twice, if it's able to do those 2 attacks on 2 attack position monsters, that's 8000 points of damage, which is exactly enough for an OTK. Of course, it was mainly used for its versatility of being a really strong, easy to summon boss monster, and used to be splashed in pretty much every deck like people will splash in hand traps today. It's just a really good staple monster, as long as your deck had light and dark monsters in it, or could fill up your graveyard with light and dark monsters with extra deck monsters. This card could easily be the number 1 on any other list if it wasn't for the fact that the number 1 Chaos monster is sometimes considered the strongest monster ever created. And at number 1, we have Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. Recently, in the past few years, this card got an errata to its text, which very much nerfed its effect. So it's on this spot on this list for its old effect, which was very much overpowered. Basically, this card is just like Blackluster Soldier, in that it's a 3000 attack beatstick that only requires you to banish 1 light and dark monster from your graveyard. So it's super easy to bring out, and its effect was, you can pay 1000 light points to send all cards in the field in both players' hands to the graveyard, and then inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for every card sent to the graveyard by this effect. Now, being able to send all cards in the field and in both players' hands to the graveyard is such a strong effect, especially since it doesn't actually destroy any of those monsters, that it's usually only given to cards with very hard to pull off cost, like the card The Law of the Normal, which has a similar effect, except it requires you to have 5 level 2 or lower normal monsters on your side of the field to activate. And Chaos Emperor Dragon had this effect while also being super easy to summon. And it even did bonus burn damage to your opponent on top of that, where you could expect your opponent to take around 3000 points of burn damage on average, which is a pretty hefty amount on top of an already broken effect. Now, you may remember Sky Scourge Norleras has a similar effect, is much harder to bring out with worse stats, and even that card still saw play due to cards being able to copy its really good effect from the graveyard. And Chaos Emperor Dragon was one of the first ever cards banned for being too strong, since it was used in the infamous Yata lock deck, where players would turbo out Chaos Emperor Dragon, use its effect to get rid of all cards in the field and in both players' hands, and then bring out Yata-Garasu in order to attack their opponent and not allow them to draw cards, so they wouldn't be able to play the game, and is still considered today as one of the best combos in the game of all time. And in fact, Yata-Garasu is still banned because of this combo. So because Chaos Emperor Dragon was too strong, it was never going to see a return. So it got a change to its effect where it could not use its effect if you activated any other card effects during the same turn. And also after you use its effect, you cannot activate any other card effects for the rest of the turn. So completely locking out your ability to use card effects in order to use Chaos Emperor Dragon's effect actually did a pretty good job of balancing its broken effect. And that's why this card is currently limited to 1 and sees no play in meta decks. It wouldn't be a surprise to see if it was taken off the ban list in the future. Turns out what made this effect really broken was being able to do other things on your turn in addition to using its broken effect. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other good Chaos cards that should have made this list, maybe like Chaos Emperor, the Dragon of Armageddon, then I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one.